Hey, what's going on? It's John, and it's time for the JMART CAST for Monday, July 4th. What's going on, friends and family? Thank you for joining me this week. Happy Canada Day to all my Canadian brethren, and happy Independence Day to the American brethren. So, hope you've had a great week. Just going to keep it to a short introduction. Nice. I think I caught that fart on the recording. Just going to keep it to a short introduction today because earlier this week on Tuesday, I did an hour-long podcast with Julian Figueroa, who I met a few weeks back when I went to the Shakepay employee event. And we had a great conversation. I think you'll really enjoy it. We talked about a bunch of things. First of all, his YouTube channel, which is called Kinetic Finance. He's got a pretty awesome short little 2-part documentary on there, which is called El Primer País, which I think translates to the first country, which is referring to El Salvador, the first country that has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. He was there for about 3 weeks. He told me a little bit about the story of what it was like to travel in El Salvador, both in the urban and rural areas of the country. So yeah, I think you'll really enjoy watching that little documentary. It's 2 parts, I think 10 minutes each. Totally worth a watch. It's called El Primer País. His YouTube channel is Kinetic Finance. The conversation was very wide-ranging, though. We touched on a bunch of different little subjects, including Bitcoin mining, also running a Bitcoin node. We talked about how the Bitcoin revolution is taking a hold in Africa, with Central African Republic being the second country making Bitcoin legal tender. And we finished off talking a little bit about how his personal interest in Bitcoin comes from his interest in storytelling in general and learning about the story of money and just asking himself the question of what is money and slowly building out that thesis for himself and coming to some really interesting conclusions. So yeah, I hope you really enjoy this episode. Just before we start the podcast, remember you can always share an episode with somebody who might be interested in listening to the JMART CAST. And also, please take a second to rate the podcast and help get more eyeballs on it. And so now, without further ado, here's Julian Figueroa. What's up, Julian?
How's it going, John?
I'm good. Do you have any nicknames?
Do I have any nicknames? I go by J Fig sometimes. It's like Julian Figueroa, but
Yeah.
short. J Fig
Yeah.
sometimes I go by.
You should see what you can see my little name on
J-Mart.
on here. Yeah, exactly. So it's the
Yeah,
same.
J-Mart J Fig.
Yeah, we're following the same format.
Yeah, when I'm sniping noobs, it's J Fig for sure. When it's arguing with people on Twitter, it's Kinetic Finance.
Yeah, Kinetic Finance. That's a great name for your YouTube channel. How did you come up with that?
Well, good question. It was actually Kinetic Crypto beforehand, and then I realized that I did want to talk more about like the broader economy and just noticing over the last year how there's a lot more to crypto than just when you see the coins trading and all that ecosystem. So much to do with the macro. I think we've learned this year so much with the price action that like interest rates have such a big effect on this whole ecosystem. But also, it was just I wanted to get into broader concepts, and I think I got really inspired by Robert Breedlove's stuff because he starts every conversation about money with the perennial question, which is like, what is money? And I've taken my own version of that, and I've gone on the street and asked people, and it's amazing how you will never get the same answer twice from people. Everyone has a different interpretation of it, and you can tell so much about people's like backgrounds and histories just by like the type of answer they give as well.
So true.
Yeah. That's kind of
I saw a little bit of that from the El Primer País video that I watched just before this.
Yeah, I botched it because I wish I asked that question when I was down there, but my Spanish was so bad. We had a journalist help us out, kind of navigate and ask a few questions, but I would have done that down there as well. I think probably would have gotten a lot different responses than up here.
Where are those shot at?
So those all the interviews that are in the first part of the documentary,
Yep.
those little quick ones, those are all done in Vancouver. We were just running around with a camera, English Bay around Vancouver, just asking people. Um,
There's
Side note on this whole thing, like
hmm
I love Canada, but it's so interesting how people are in different parts of Canada and then also just going like 20 kilometers across the border. I found that I've just started getting into this whole going on the street, asking people questions, and you sort of can do it two ways. You can either have a sign and then hope people come up to you, or you just
hmm
you flag down random strangers and you say, "Hey, do you want to take
hmm
part in a video?" I
hmm
would say the couple times that I've done it in Vancouver, I would say 6 to 7 out of 10 people are just like, no thanks. Like, I don't want to answer your question. We went to Bellingham a couple weeks ago and I was doing the same thing on the street there. And I think out of like the 10 people we stopped by, only like one person was like, nah, I don't have time. Everybody wanted to get something in. And then a couple weeks ago when I met you
hmm
in Toronto, I did the
Yeah.
same thing with one of Shakepay's content creators, Mike, and I've just found people there were like a lot more open to answering questions as well. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe my sample size is too small, but I find people here like a little bit closed off to like just being on
Hmm.
camera. They don't like being stopped in the middle of the street to answer things.
Weird. Interesting
Yeah.
observation. Because I would have thought it would like be a breakdown between rural versus urban, where like city people are always like about the being quicker about things, whereas rural folks are always slow. They like to take their time. At least that's what I noticed at the Tim Hortons versus like city versus country.
Yeah.
That's where I thought it would be the breakdown. But you're saying Toronto is different from BC area.
It could also just be a timing thing. I think you're right. Like some people are going to be in a rush. If you're going to be asking people like at the metro station, they're probably not going to stop by because they have no clue how long this is going to take. And so sometimes we have to like rephrase the questions like, hey, do you want to just answer one question for camera and then ask them like six more just so that they don't think it's like a big commitment up front? Because again, you
Ah.
are just like you're flagging people down. But I just know like I've watched so many of these style of videos and like the
hmm
places where you always get like the coolest, variety of people are usually these big metro areas like New
Yeah.
York. You get people who have like entire shows just based out of asking people in like Times Square
hmm
random questions. But I mean, yeah, just so far in like Vancouver, I've found people are a little bit more closed off than other places.
I did recently have like a CP24 reporter come ask me to do a quick little video. It was myself with my family, and now that I think about it, it's got to be like the perfect conditions for you to really want to do that, because like it was really really hot and I
Hmm.
was with my family. I wanted to spend time with them, so it's like if I agree to do this, I'm taking that time away from my family, and it's on top of that, it's like hot. Like I'm not going to be in the shade for this. Like so, I guess that's a big part of it as well. If you don't have the perfect conditions, most people are just going to say no.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like one of the things I do avoid doing is pulling over couples, because I find that like it's one of those things where you'll just see like the girlfriend or the boyfriend like look at the other one and just be like, nah, like not
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
So I try and go after people who are like chilling or sitting on like park benches and stuff because it's just
hmm
like, are you like on your phone? Is that really more important
hmm
than
Yeah.
getting to the point? I don't
You-
know. But yeah, no, there is like a science to it. I had a buddy who used to do these types of videos outside like nightclubs, and that was the best because you would get drunk people going in and out, and people are like super loosened up, and he'd be doing it at night, and so you get like a ton of great things. But for sure, when you're asking like more economic questions, people are you just never know what you're gonna get. And I find people's like confidence too really varies. Like I'll start off asking people about, I'll say like, how is inflation affecting you? And they'll be like, oh, I don't know anything about the economy. Like, don't ask me questions about the economy. I don't know anything about that. It's like, well, it's like it's like, it's not about the economy. It's about you, right? And like,
hmm
what are your feelings and perceptions of it, right? There's no right or wrong, I don't think. So,
Well, I've seen enough like gotcha videos where it's like some reporter like trying to specifically find the people that have like the worst opinions and then compiling them into like a string of like different cuts that
yeah,
make fun of the whole group. So it's I could see the hesitation.
yeah.
How long have you had your channel for now?
Oh man, it's been on and off, but I would say like I haven't really been full time at it till probably like the last 3 months. Like if you follow it, basically my routine is in July of last year, I started doing weekly live streams. I've missed a couple here and there, but I try to get at least one live stream per week. And then from there, I was only really getting like a main video out maybe once every month or 2 months. So
That's
it's
pretty
this
good.
well, I want to go full time. The problem is it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't pay, and so it's a balance of like
Mm-hmm.
the three things that I do when I'm not making YouTube is I run a video production business, and I do trading, and then the YouTube channel's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I'm not doing either of those three things, I have like an off-grid cabin that is just like a lot of work all the time too. So it's a juggling act, and the YouTube channel has kind of been pushed to fourth a lot of the time. And now I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I really feel like I want to get that one going. Um, so yeah, it's been on and off. Like I'll have spurts of doing these big projects, but now I'm trying to get more into okay,
Mm-hmm.
bare minimum, the live stream happens every week, and then now I'm getting into like 2 TikTok videos. So
Mm-hmm.
overall the channel's existed since like 2019, but I wouldn't say it's ever really been like full time until just the last kind of 2 months or so.
Wow. And is your video production company like, is that what was responsible for the tahini's commercials, or were
Tahinis, no, we didn't do commercials for tahinis. I just did that little real thing. So that was interesting. Like when I was out and when we met in Toronto, it was
mm-hmm.
Shakepay.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of didn't kind of sponsored me. It was like they wanted to have me out there as just a gesture of, goodwill and fun. They didn't really
Mm-hmm.
expect that. They were like, we'll cover your trip out here. Just come film content with us and hang out, and we'll show you some
Wow.
more of the culture. Yeah, so that was like super nice of
Amazing.
them. So and prior to that, I had met them down in Miami. I'd met Jean and then a couple of the other kind of the people that came down to Miami from the crew there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, and I just took my camera. I didn't really have a plan, and the Tahini's video came out of it naturally, just because Ali was a part of like the orange pill session
Yeah,
that Shakepay did there. But I find the story so interesting because
it
I'm
is.
starting to really try and reach out to like more people in the Bitcoin space that people know Tahinis that are Canadian, but I don't think that story is known at large with like a lot of Bitcoiners, and I think that's super interesting. And his business has been like a complete success.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's Bitcoin is for everyone. It's not just for anarchist libertarians and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I think Ali's story is really cool. And the little video I did does not cover the whole thing. Like he
Mm-hmm.
has a really interesting story about like how he immigrated here, and they started with like one restaurant, and they were working super hard, and now they got this franchise system. And I eventually I didn't get a super long interview with him, but I want to talk more at large about that. Like building a franchise and scaling a business is one of the hardest things
Mm-hmm.
imaginable. Like managing to pull yourself out of the day to day and make
Mm-hmm.
systems is incredibly challenging. It's something that I would say I failed at in my own business because I really wanted to get more employees and stuff and scale it up
Mm-hmm.
because we had a lot of demand, but I couldn't figure out the hiring process. And
That's
then just
tough.
I hated building out systems. Yeah. And so it just stayed kind of this thing where like I would spearhead it and I would give gigs to my friends and stuff. And it still runs, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's ever going to get to a point where, I got one in like every city and I got the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing running on its own. Like I kind of always have to be a part of it. And there's probably a way to separate that, but I haven't quite cracked the code, and it's just not the same. An agency is not the same as like a restaurant for sure as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I really envy the people that do figure it out because it is tough, but it's doable for everyone.
Well, I think Ali's story is pretty awesome, and it like it could use more people who are content creators who can kind of get it out of him almost, and share it with the world. So that'd be pretty cool if you actually got a chance to do that. Uh,
Yeah, I did get like we got like a 12-minute interview, but yeah, I mean like things are they were pretty rushed those couple days that we were there.
mm-hmm.
So I might do like a follow up with Zoom and stuff, but I got good footage of like the whole establishment and whatnot, and I think there is like a longer 5 or 6 minute video in there or 10-minute video that
Mm-hmm.
goes over his story, which would be really cool. So yeah, hoping to make that at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe if real quick we could just summarize, like generally speaking, like he told some of it during that orange pill session, but essentially he was in Egypt during the what was that revolution called?
The
Um,
Arab Spring,
Arab
yeah,
Spring. Thank you. And he saw what kind of inflation did to Egypt and how it raised the price of food so that people just couldn't even afford for their basic needs. Then that led
yeah,
to such like a crazy regime change. And post that, he was in Canada and kind of was seeing some parallels as a
hmm
response to the pandemic, and didn't know what to do, and he was probably, I think he was saying like he was like his business wasn't going to make it. So what they ended up doing is just kind of following the footsteps of what MicroStrategy did, which is put a lot of all their or all of their cash savings into Bitcoin, right? And then
Mhm.
this was,
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, like I think a big part of it was he was definitely like seeing the dollar get devalued early on, and
hmm
then MicroStrategy. Like I don't have like a big successful business, but I was lucky enough to kind of do the same thing as well. As soon as MicroStrategy announced, I was like, oh shit, like I also have like a ton of cash on the balance sheet. Um, call it a balance sheet. I was like, I don't know how to spend this because like I'm not scaling my business right now. It's getting
hmm
full, but like I also want to do the YouTube thing, so I can't scale it. So what do I do? I did the same thing, putting it into Bitcoin, and then I ended up making a video after that, talking about I think there are certain types of businesses that really benefit from doing that. I don't think all businesses should have Bitcoin on the balance sheet because I think if
hmm
you don't have free cash flow and you don't have reserves and stuff, it doesn't really make much sense. And if you don't have that low time preference, um, look at things as well for your business. If you're trying to, sell your business, or if you are able to scale your business up quite quickly,
hmm
it doesn't make sense to put it into an asset like that. But if you are in a situation like Ali and I were, and you're like looking for an inflation hedge,
hmm
it's almost the easiest one to get into. And to break it down, like unless you have millions of dollars, you're not going to buy real estate. Real estate also comes with a whole bunch of maintenance costs. A
hmm
lot of businesses, when they have free cash flow, they go and they buy a warehouse, or they, instead of renting, they go and they buy whatever place that they're in, the McDonald's model, right? And then
hmm
if they're not doing real estate, and many businesses can't because the cost of entry is too high, right? And you don't want to take on like a mortgage as well. If you're not doing real estate, some people put it into like bonds, or they start like a corporate portfolio for their business.
hmm
Um, I ended up doing that as well. But again, the thing that's nice about Bitcoin is you can dollar cost average into it, not in the same way that you can with stocks.
hmm
And because stocks aren't super easily divisible, let's just say you want to load up on some Amazon for your corporation. You're buying in $2,000 increments until, well, the split was pretty recent, but uh, because of Bitcoin, like any size of business, if you have even like a really small balance sheet, right, you can just pace it out exactly how you want. And it's also just like it's a 24/7 asset as well. So if you do need to
hmm
dispose of it for whatever purposes, it's pretty quick and easy.
hmm
It's also nice knowing that you can just own it, and you're not,
Yeah.
just leaving it at a brokerage, right?
Holding it securely yourself where it's not, nothing's
Exactly. I
going to
mean,
happen
like,
to it.
this is all theoretical, and I don't think any event has ever come where people's like stocks have been seized. They've been diluted, but I think all of the brokerages technically are only insured for up to $250,000. So if you had like $1 million of stocks, and let's just say like the whole stock system stopped working all of a sudden, never happened, but it's
hmm
possible. Just like you buy and hold, you'd only be insured up to that certain amount, and you can't take possession of stocks, right? I don't know. Maybe you can do certificates, but no one's really doing that. With Bitcoin, it's just like I have the keys, I can buy as much as I want, and then
hmm
self custody's up to me. I can make that as rigid or as like
hmm
not rigid as I want. So
Yeah, and you can verify the whole thing with your own node.
exactly, yeah. And I am just getting into that right now. I got a little mining rig. I cannot seem to figure out how to connect to my Ethernet, but once it's going, the node's coming next.
Um, Amazing. What which model do you mind sharing?
Oh, it's I was at a Bitcoin meetup we had here, and some guy was like, "Yo, I got this like S9 for sale," and I was like,
Oh, okay.
"Fuck, I don't even care if it works that well. Well, it should work, but like
hmm
he sold it. I think I bought it for like $300 or something Canadian. Probably not the greatest
Nice.
deal. It's super like outdated model, but I
hmm
got really inspired. I don't know if you know this company called Mint Green.
I know I'm not familiar.
So Mint Green is they are outfitting boiler rooms with miners, and then they're using the heat output to heat apartment buildings here in Vancouver. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
super cool. It's super cool. So what I didn't realize about these things, I always thought like, well, that doesn't seem like that economical. Like, why would a miner be a good source of heat compared to just like a regular heater, taking the cost of electricity out of it? I didn't realize that an electrical space heater that uses 1400 watts versus a miner that uses 1400 watts. They generate about the same amount of heat, and the only difference is the miner is crazy loud. Uh,
Wow.
but all that heat is extractable, and if you can build heat exchange systems and stuff like that, you can have like a whole warehouse in the bottom of your apartment building, and
Mm-hmm.
you can funnel all that heat into central heating to be
Yeah, yeah.
dispersed, which is just a crazy thought because you always think of miners as like they are there to mine Bitcoin. They don't really serve any other purpose. They're just these big metal boxes. But I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize they produce a crazy, crazy amount of heat, and that is really useful potentially as well. So
Yeah, why not recapture that, divert
yeah,
it towards a useful function?
yeah. They
That's awesome.
recently actually they just got a grant, I believe, from BC Hydro, which is like our state or provincial electrical company, to outfit a few more buildings with this. So
Very
yeah,
cool.
looking forward to seeing how that develops. Really cool.
Mm-hmm. I think with the S9s, I've read that you can install a firmware that lets you kind of control the power usage.
Yeah.
So you can like wind it up or wind it down. And then I've read that some people are able to wind it down to a sufficient level where it's not so loud that it's like really you can't have it on, you can't be around it if it's that loud, but
Mhm.
it quietens down, quiets down considerably. And then it also acts as a space heater. So you kind of get the best of both worlds a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
so I have an off-grid cabin. Unfortunately, I don't have like an amazing power supply for it. Like I just have solar. But eventually I'll be getting like I think diesel or propane out there. But
hmm
the hardest thing out there is like if you want to heat during the winter, you're either running a fireplace, and I have one out there, but it's a small one because it's a small cabin and it runs out every like 3 or 4 hours. Or you have like a space heater, but again, that's just taking up like all your electrical, all your battery over the winter. And I was thinking like, I should get a miner out there because that way I can get the heat from the miner and it can subsidize itself a little bit as well, and
hmm
I can get full internet. So that's my pet project eventually is getting this guy out there and then running something into my cabin. I'll have the thing outside in like the freezing winter, and it'll just be pumping heat indoors.
How how do you get internet up there in the cabin?
I can get 4G, so I just get like a mobile hotspot. A lot of people are like, "Oh, you should get a Starlink," and Starlink is
So
very
expensive.
expensive. It's very expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, that
If
you're
you
not
if
gonna
you can
get
get
that.
4G, it's much better to do that than get a Starlink. Starlink's really for like the truly off-grid places.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it doesn't take a lot of data to because it's just
No.
it's just text, right? Like,
What is it? It's like 2 megabytes a block, no, or something
yeah, or
more.
is it
More.
1 megabyte even?
And that's like a full block. So what is that every day? So that's like every 10 minutes you're getting a megabyte down. It's nothing really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, it's nothing.
Great,
Yeah,
great.
so cool.
And you're thinking about doing a node as well. Any like, have you done your research yet?
I don't have my technicals together. Good time to check out BTC sessions because he has
Yeah.
all the fantastic tutorials on that. But I'm still starting out on that. I'm just a pleb who buys it, dollar cost
hmm
averages, likes the
Yeah.
asset, doesn't know the technicals that much.
Well,
Don't have much of a computer science background.
there's a huge journey that encompasses so many different things.
Yeah,
So it's like and it never stops too, right? So you're
yeah,
just we're all on it and we're moving closer to something. It's hard to say what exactly, but it involves learning all these things like what is a node, what does it do, how do you build one, why
yeah,
is it good to have? So yeah, definitely, I agree with the whole plug for BTC sessions. I've watched his videos and through them learned how to run my own node as well. So
yeah,
I can tell you, I'm running an Umbrel. It works
yeah. That's
okay.
one I've heard. Yeah, Umbrel. So what do you have, like a Raspberry Pi, or are you running it off your computer? Or?
I have a Raspberry Pi, a dedicated one that I got
Nice.
before. There's apparently a huge shortage happening right now for Raspberry
Oh,
Pis.
really? Jeez.
Yeah.
Do you think it's related to Bitcoin or just something else?
I think it's related to just microchips being there being a shortage in microchips in general.
Oh, yeah.
hmm But
Yeah.
I'm going to be trying to learn about running a node um, on Linux. So I do have an old desktop computer that's just sitting collecting dust. So I'm gonna try to see if I can fire up a new project and learn how to run a Bitcoin node on a old Linux, on an old, it was a Windows desktop, but I'm going to load Linux firmware on it. I'll,
Yeah, man, I've had a lot of people tell me I have to read the block size war. I was around when the Bitcoin Cash split happened, but like I always had a hard time wrapping my head around like, well, why not just get like bigger blocks and stuff? And
mm-hmm,
just realizing that like you can run like the world's biggest digital money system on 30-year-old hardware
mm-hmm,
is a really good thing because you have like all of these places that, eventually everywhere in the world's going to catch up to like 4G or 5G and all that, but Bitcoin is most important in the countries that haven't caught up. And if let's just say we
mm-hmm,
all went to bigger block sizes and stuff, that makes like the barrier to entry for a country like the Central African Republic so much harder to get into
mm-hmm,
it. I was
mm-hmm.
reading the other day that like, and I don't know if this is fully true, but apparently there's only like 11 or 12 full nodes for Bitcoin SV. And again,
Oh,
I'm not
wow.
entirely sure on it, but for sure, like the blockchain for Bitcoin SV, I think they're dealing with like 256 megabyte or like 1 gigabyte blocks.
Whoa.
And almost all the transactions are like just spam. There's not much actual value being transacted on the chain,
Mm-hmm,
but you need to download like terabytes on terabytes on terabytes to get the full SV blockchain. And so it makes it basically impossible because there's no economic incentive to do it, right? Like if you want to have a
mm-hmm,
full node, you have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to do it. But I don't
mm-hmm.
know, like what's the cheapest you could get a full node for now? I think the Bitcoin blockchain is what, like 400 gigabytes?
Yeah, between 400 and 500.
So I mean, like an SSD for that size, you could get in bulk from Alibaba or something for like $80, and then a Raspberry Pi is like 100 or something.
Mm-hmm,
So we're talking about a sovereign way to verify money
mm-hmm,
that is used everywhere for $180, as opposed to like the
mm-hmm.
next iteration of Bitcoin. I don't know what Bitcoin Cash is at. Probably not as crazy as SV, but still pretty high up. $180 to basically verify your own transactions is pretty great. So
It
yeah,
took me a while to understand that, to be honest, though.
Mhm.
It's a hard concept because, like, this is a funny way to put it, but I just thought, like, if you look at the number on your phone, then like it's got to be true. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, I didn't think like, oh, it could just be like somebody just shows you whatever number you want to see, but in the back, like, everything's siphoned away. Like, how do you know? How do you know that, like, when you buy Bitcoin from the exchange, that you actually have it and it's not just like them saying that you have it, but it's not really there? You got to move it
yeah,
off the exchange. You got to move it into your own wallet, and then you verify it with a node. Okay, where do I get a node? Well, you can use somebody else's node, but then you got to trust them, or you can build your own node. Okay, I'll build my own node. How much does it cost? Millions and millions of dollars. Okay, never mind. I'm
yeah,
out, right? Like
yeah.
$180? Sure, I'll do it.
Man, it's so interesting seeing how quick everyone is learning in like this one vacuum how important it is to have the keys to your own Bitcoin. Because I think obviously like when Mount Gox went down, everyone learned like the hard way back then.
Mm-hmm.
But every successive like wave of like bull markets we get into, we get these new participants who go straight to the I just want to own it as a speculative thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
they chase the yield or they keep it on exchanges or whatever, right? And then they just, I feel so bad. Like some people are like, oh, anybody who chased yield is an idiot. But it's just like, dude, like Celsius and all these things, they were working fine for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the average person is not going to like read all these things. Then they wake up one day and they find they can't withdraw their money. And like, that's a brutal way to learn, but it happens to so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but where was I going with this? Well, the whole thing that's so interesting is like every single one of these yield lenders, I think with the exception of Ledin,
Yeah.
is basically under complete distress right now. They're
Yeah.
either raising like a ton of capital to basically, they're basically raising capital to just get the withdrawals fulfilled. They're going to basically dilute any previous equity holders to zero. I think that's
Wow.
almost the plan with like BlockFi at this point.
Yeah, I just got
Um,
my dad off BlockFi finally.
yeah, yeah.
After
And
Celsius went
Voyager,
down, I was like, all right, Dad,
yeah,
let's.
Celsius and Voyager. Like the crazy thing is like Celsius and or sorry, Voyager and whatchamacallit, a
Three
BlockFi.
capital arrows, or
They
yeah.
weren't, yeah, they were more involved with 3AC, whereas Celsius was more like, we're gonna get caught up in these like staking mechanisms. So,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have good regulatory stuff going on there. So it's interesting. No one's lending them a lifeline. FTX stayed away from them for sure. Um,
That
but
tells you
it's
something
brutal.
about it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I actually am working on a video going over like the top 3 things to watch out for in a crypto project, and like the first one's like, it's worth looking up the management of the company that you're investing in and see what statements people put out. And like the one with Mashinsky is like, he shits on Bitcoiners all the time. He's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
30% of all Bitcoin's been lost because the Bitcoiners told you to
Right.
take possession of your keys. I'm just like,
Right.
yeah, that's how Bitcoin works. And
Yeah.
and if your system worked too, people wouldn't have problems with drawing out of there. So
Well, it's amazing how much that clip backfired, right? That's a famous clip of him saying that you
totally.
shouldn't hold your own keys and you should let somebody who's more, I guess, technically sound to hold that for you because it's going to be safer. Because Bitcoin, let's be honest, is prone to user error. If you're not
Yeah.
careful, then you can lose your Bitcoin. So he was making the case that you got to trust somebody else. You can't do it yourself, which is
Hmm.
kind of shitty because like you got to empower your customers. You can't tell
Yeah.
them that they can't do something. That's how I see it anyway. But so, and then of course it backfired because all the people that thought, oh, he'll do a better job holding our coins are no longer owners of those coins. So boom.
No. No. Yeah, I mean it's brutal how these lessons have to be learned. Man, the thing I'm just really grateful for is like, I was part of the wave that got my money stuck in Quadriga, and so I'm like one of the creditors on that. I had a like good amount of Bitcoin, good amount of ETH and Canadian dollars in there, and like I learned the hard way on that. And
Wow.
I did actually have money on Celsius at one point, and thankfully I pulled it off. Like this is the thing with all these things is like, Luna, people had some inkling of was going to go down before it happened. Like there were a few people, but like you had to really follow like the Dylan LeClaire's and all the others, like the real
Mm-hmm.
Nick Carter insiders. Like only a couple people were calling the shit out for Luna and how that algorithmic stablecoin stuff wouldn't work. The thing is like I couldn't be bothered to understand all that.
Mm-hmm.
The Celsius stuff was like a little bit easier, and thankfully, a lot of people were like, "Yeah, this is going down." And then you also had Mashinsky coming out calling FUD and looking really desperate. So,
Mm-hmm.
that was months of people calling out Celsius, and I realized as the yields were going down, like it's not even worth taking the risk at that point. Like
Mm-hmm.
2%, this thing
Mm-hmm.
could be a scam, even if it's like 5% chance that the whole thing could go down. That is not worth 2% yield on my Bitcoin. I look at it similar to like how Greg Foss talks about bonds, where it's just like it's all risk and no reward. And
Mm-hmm.
you got to realize like, your yield has to come from somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and your potential upside is like 5% a year and your potential downside is 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So you better have a damn good reason to put your money into these things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, you better do your research, because if you're not, like, I think the lesson's just been learned by everyone at this point that like the risk to reward is not worth 5%
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
lend it to someone that has like opaque practices. Like I got to know exactly where those funds are being lent out if I'm ever going to lend them out again. So
Yeah, you gotta at least put a small stack in. Don't put the whole thing in there because like
yeah,
it's not
well,
worth the risk.
so this is what happens in the fiat world, though, man. Like you got inflation going crazy. Everyone is chasing yield, even if it doesn't really make any sense. They see 5
Mm-hmm.
or they see 10%,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, "It's got to do something. My money's always got to work for me. Always got to work for me, right? It can't just
Well,
be on its own store of value."
the safe choice has been eliminated away. Like you said, it can't be its own store of value because it's just deflating away.
Yeah,
This came to mind just now. One of the things that people kept saying in your video about what is money is it's a measure of work. And I kind of agree with that. It's true, but it's a measure of work at that moment because like years later, it's no longer equal to that same value that it was when you first got measured it for that work that was done. And this is kind of what we heard at the Orange Pill session when the guy from what was his podcast name? Your Life, Your Choice, I think, something along those lines. He was saying his dad could make surplus income, but he did nothing with. And even though his work was valued quite high when he earned it. When he earned the money, it was worthless when he actually needed to spend it to get something back out of it.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I mean, another addition of this is I think there's like a soft conception among lower and middle class people that watch mainstream media that millionaires and billionaires are getting paid huge bonuses and paychecks, and that's where the majority of their wealth is coming from. And it's not true.
Yeah.
Like most billionaires, I was looking this up, have less than like I mean, it's kind of obvious that like why would you need that much? But like most billionaires have less than 1% of their net worth in liquid cash or any liquid investment at any point in time. So even bonds included. So your average billionaire only has like $10 million that he can spend tomorrow. The other 990 million is like locked into long-term equity or bonds or real estate, right?
Hmm.
And people don't get that at all. And that's why you get these ideas of like, oh, well, then we should have a wealth tax or we should have like an unrealized capital gains. And but you realize like the system just benefits people who are able to stash their money into things.
Hmm.
And if you can't do that for whatever reason, you're toast because you'll never catch up to the motorboat that's zipping along that is inflation, right?
Hmm.
It's like you're on a kayak if you're a wage earner, right? And the rest of the world's on this little speedboat, and then the millionaires and the billionaires are on their super yachts and they're just ripping past, or they're on their jet
Nice.
skis, right?
That's a
So
very Vancouver, BC
yeah, yeah,
metaphor. I
water
love it.
you know.
Yeah. I like to just think of the hamster on the wheel, just like running and running and running. But it's even worse
Yeah,
than the hamster because you're not staying in one place. You're like falling back.
yeah. Well, and it's sad because I think it's like the conversation I have here a lot with my friends is like, and they almost want to like avoid the conversation. They're just like, Julian, like, why are you bringing this up? Like, this is like just a downer conversation. It's just like, well, how are we gonna like afford houses as a kid, as like adults? Like,
Hmm.
how are we gonna have kids and like own a place and have like backyards without moving? And it's like, well, yeah, probably not gonna happen. Hope I strike it rich one day.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just keep working. Maybe I'll take on another job. It's just like, no, like unfortunately, if you actually do the math, unless you're making six figures, or they somehow change it to like you only need to put like 2% down to get a mortgage, you're not going to get a house in Vancouver. It's like it's mathematically impossible. And I say that to people, and then they just kind of blank out because it's just like you don't want to hear that, right? Like you live here, and you want to figure it out eventually, but it's just like no. The only way you afford real estate in Vancouver is you got to hitch your money to something else, build that up, and then if you're lucky, if you're really
Hmm.
lucky, you can get a down payment going.
Hmm.
But again, $1 million, 200K down payment, you're still talking, and that's $1 million is like gets you a condo. Now doesn't get you a house. You're still talking about $7,000, $8,000 a month mortgage, and that only goes up with the rates going up. It's
Jesus.
just
Yeah.
it's fucking impossible here, and nobody wants to have the conversation, and it sucks. Because like, what else do you do, right? Like most people, they just give up and they move out, or
Yeah.
they just rent forever, and that's fine. Some people are okay with that, but yeah, it's
Hmm.
it's brutal. No one, yeah, it's
Well,
sad.
it's a huge disruption, and it has a lot of first, second, third order effects that are negative.
Hmm.
Like I mean, it definitely drives homelessness. Like you know what I mean. Like we've just seen that by like these by just seeing like more tents popping up in urban cities. It
Yeah.
there's and also I mean the other thing is the price inflate like going up like that is just a it's a measure of the money being broken, right? Like the houses are getting this monetary premium that should be in the money, but it's just being replaced for the money
Well,
into the
well,
houses because
houses, yeah, houses get this crazy monetary premium for like a bunch of reasons, right? Like number one, it can produce cash flow, like gold, most stocks, etc., are not, right?
hmm
Um, and then number two, what other asset in the world can you lever up like 5 to 1? Like no
hmm
one else is gonna get, you're not gonna get a loan for anything else. Try getting a business loan that
hmm
levers you up 5 to 1. Impossible. But
hmm
real estate, sure. And why? Because the notion it just goes up forever. So who cares if you can't afford your mortgage payment? The bank will gladly take it off your hands. They'll make a mint, right? They'll just hold on to it for a couple of years, even if there's a recession, and they'll be able to flip it for more. And it's yeah, it's such a shitty system. Um, yeah. Well, you know what's really interesting is like you look at countries that don't have uh good banking infrastructure and mortgages, and they don't have crazy monetary premiums on their housing. Go to countries, and I mean, like, these are third world countries, but go to countries where you cannot get mortgages. You just
Mm-hmm.
can't. You got to buy stuff either flat
Mm-hmm.
out, or they give you a mortgage for like 50% down at like crazy
Mm-hmm.
interest rates. There's no monetary premium on real estate in those places, right? Because you can't lever it up. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Was that what it was like in El Salvador when you went?
Well, El Salvador is an interesting case. I think it's because, from my feeling of it, and like a lot of South American countries and Latin American, to be honest, every country that's not Canada and the US, the families stay together, right? So you'll have a family household and everyone will contribute to,
Mm-hmm.
a mortgage or maintaining the house or whatever, right? So the
Yeah.
kids will stay basically until they get married, and they might even stay once they get married. So it's a completely different system. And that also makes it harder for us up here as well, just because we do have this notion of like, no, once you're 18, you leave the house, you forge your own destiny, instead of like, you might have, I mean, I know actually quite a few families here that are like Chinese or from India, and they'll have like four co-signers on the mortgage, right? You don't,
Mm-hmm.
like most, most like white families, I'll just say white families, you're not going to
No
see it that
worries.
often. You'll see it a lot more in other ethnicities and immigrants and stuff, because they have
Yeah.
stronger familial connections, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Now with El Salvador, is it is it that like they just don't have the infrastructure for making real estate kind of like this big industry, or is that part of it too? Like in like these
so I mean,
smaller.
El Salvador is a really interesting country from like a geographical standpoint, because almost half of the population lives, maybe it's like a third. Most, like a good majority of the population is somehow connected to the capital city, which is San Salvador. It's like a huge, sprawling metropolis. And
Hmm.
it's quite modern. Like it's got some dingy areas, but like the core, like they have, they do have like 40 story apartment buildings around there.
Oh,
um,
cool.
so, in terms of like that part of El Salvador, I think they probably do have, banking, and people are getting mortgages for those places. But as soon as you go outside the city, a
Hmm.
lot of the properties and things around there, I imagine, just get passed on through generations, or they get
Hmm.
sold, in like a just, broker to broker kind of system,
Hmm.
not like how we have it up here, where everything is connected to the bank somehow.
Hmm.
Um,
I see.
Again, I'm speculating, but I imagine, just judging off of how I've seen, they have development areas in El Salvador, like Surf City is a big one along the coastline. But you start going back in the jungle and stuff, these are big lots, where people are doing farming, or just like
Hmm.
family lots that are just passed within a community, basically, I imagine, for, dozens of years.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess there's a little bit of like a similar situation like that in Armenia. That's where I'm originally from, and
Oh yeah.
uh, it does it is like that. I think in the rural areas, of course, in the city, it's a little bit different because they did go through industrialization uh, when they were part of the Soviet Union, and they do have a lot of like buildings and such. And but what you're describing does sound very familiar. Now, tell me a little bit more about El Salvador and your trip. I remember you said you were gone. You were there for 3 weeks.
Yeah, about 2.5 weeks or so. Yeah.
Yeah. And you did like a tour throughout both the city as well as the coastline and see those more rural areas there.
Yeah.
Was there a big difference? Tell us about the
um
compare and contrast those two.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around, like, I've been around Peru and Mexico, and San Salvador to me had the vibe of like a pretty traditional, like, Latin American hub. The
Mm-hmm.
thing that drives me crazy about San Salvador is they don't have a lot of traffic lights. So when you're crossing the street, like, there's no pedestrian light. It's like Frogger every time, and that
Oh
drove
my
me
God.
nuts. They got to figure
Scary.
that out. I don't understand why they can't. I get that, like, you don't want to stop traffic on and off, and the roads there need some work. But, what was the vibe I got? I think the vibe I got is that I don't really have much of a history with El Salvador. Like, I didn't even know much about it before the whole Bitcoin thing, but I've been doing some studying and stuff. They went through this big civil war. They came out of it. Now they have this whole new, it seems like a dynasty in, the first innings with Bukele. Uh, where he's just radically changing the country. And so
Mhm.
from the
Now,
people that we spoke to, there's not like a ton of understanding about Bitcoin, but everyone we talked to was very positive on Bukele. And we were looking and I was like, I got to find some skeptics. We had one of the journalists, actually, both of the journalists that were helping us with the project were the skeptics of Bukele.
mhm.
And that makes sense, right? Because he's done some stuff to actually kind of kill freedom of press down there. They don't like, you know, being bad mouthed. The government does not like bad press against them. So
Yeah.
they come at you pretty hard.
Mhm.
Um, but besides that, like everyone we talked to was super hopeful because they have all these on the ground initiatives, like take away Bitcoin out of the whole thing. Every child there, basically from like kindergarten to grade 12, was given either a laptop or a tablet. Like we don't even have that up here. And that would be a great thing for the government to subsidize. I would be so down for that. I know that a lot of people can afford their own here,
Mhm.
but imagine if like every, you know, kid was able to get this basic tool for education and for function uh,
Mhm.
given to them by the government. I think that's an amazing initiative. They're doing a ton of infrastructure replacement there. So they're rebuilding roads. Apparently, they're going to build a new airport for this Bitcoin city, like which will be
Mhm.
a massive, major new airport. I think under Bukele, they expanded the current airport, made a couple more terminals there. But everywhere you go, it gives me vibes of like Vancouver, basically. Like there's construction everywhere in that country. And I don't know if that was the case before Bukele, but I know that he's doing a ton. And like another one of the big initiatives is they built a pet hospital.
I remember that one. Yeah, I was gonna mention that.
Yeah, they put that up, and he was like, "Oh, it was paid for by like Bitcoin profits or whatever." It's just like it's kind of a joke.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
so when we were there, it was like they hadn't even. I think they had the cement and beams for like 2 stories out of the three. 3 months after, the whole thing's done. Like they
What?
moved at rapid speed there. The
Mhm.
like I don't know. Maybe I don't have much to compare it to, but like buildings take forever to make here, and it's
Yeah.
probably because we have like all these codes and stuff. Like there's this construction project near where I live, and it was like I don't know. I think like a 200 unit apartment complex. It took them
Mhm.
like 9 years to finish it.
Mhm.
They're putting up pet hospitals and God knows
Mhm.
what in San Salvador in months, right? So
Yeah.
things are moving along really quickly there. They're building a lot. The city is becoming more modern. If you go there and you're in like the main hubs, they have like every American restaurant, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Wendy's, like all that stuff. Super
And
modern.
and they all accept Bitcoin, right?
They all accept Bitcoin, and that's super cool. The
Mhm.
way they accept it is very different. Like you'll have some places where they only know Chivo, and then if you want to send it from like another wallet, you'll have to kind of like guide them through it. And but I
Mhm.
imagine that's changing now as people kind of understand
Mhm.
it, and they also get a lot more
They're
Bitcoin
learning,
tourism.
yeah.
Some places have just integrated Ibex Mercado, which is just like Lightning. Really, really like McDonald's has that system down. Like their way of doing Bitcoin payments is just the easiest. Um, but you know, it's a lot more modern than I think people expect. You know, they hear about El Salvador and they probably still think like you know kind of ravaged, but no, like they have big malls there. We were in
Mhm.
these like giant shopping malls, cinemas.
Mhm.
Nice public parks there.
Mhm.
Now, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like there are areas, and we did go through like some slums, and I would actually imagine like there are a lot more people who live in like you know the
Mhm.
slums that then live in like the modern areas of
Mhm.
El Salvador.
Mhm.
But um, you know, it's pretty good. And like even when we went through like the sketchy areas, like we never had anybody come up to us. You know,
To bother you,
people were
yeah.
there really nice, and then so that's like the main city.
Mhm.
When you go over to the beach, it's like their tourism paradise for like they get people from out of the country. Not as many as they are getting now, but they're getting like, you know, they're getting people from all over the place coming to go surfing there.
Mhm.
A ton of expats who've come over.
Mhm.
We met some really interesting people. I liked El Tunco. El Tunco was like probably my favorite like beach town. El Zonte is nice, but it's not fun to kind of navigate. Like you can't just like walk to everything, or you can, but you're just like covered in sweat after. El Tunco is kind of, you can tell it's like a little bit better design for tourism and stuff. It's just like one street or two streets.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
El
the
Zonte is amazing though. El Zonte is really cool. It's got these like amazing black sand beaches. But man, everyone there is just like they're happy. That was the vibe that I got. I know that there are issues with security, and there's a lot of things going on like kidnapping that gets kind of shoved under the rug. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually take issue with some of the stuff that like Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert post, because they only show the good side of El Salvador. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stuff under the hood that is not that great, that the
Mm-hmm.
government is kind of omitting from the public. But uh, there's nuance everywhere you go, right? So I would say as a whole, um, when they say his approval ratings are 86%, I 100% believe that.
Yeah.
Everyone there seems to be reaping the benefits of, I think, his more positive vision of the future, and the fact that he's just getting shit done. Bukele is like no other politician they've ever had down there. Uh, you know, he's I mean, he's running it like a CEO, and I don't know if that's the best thing for like every country or every society, but I think for a very tiny country like 200 kilometers long,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's the best bet that they've had on leadership, probably in the last like 50 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, they've gone through everything, right? They've gone through civil war. I think I saw that, like, because of the civil war, that basically made their original currency they had worthless, and that's what led to them being de-dollarized, or not de-dollar, but dollarized, where they had to basically make
I
their
don't
economy work.
I don't know if they suffered hyperinflation with the cologne. I'd have to look that up. I think it was more. I have to look up that whole thing. All I know is that when they introduced the cologne, or when they introduced the US dollar, it was super controversial as well as
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin. Like, I remember the first couple of weeks of Bitcoin, you had people protesting.
Mm-hmm.
But when the cologne got changed to the US dollar, it was like pretty hellish for a bit there. But people
Yeah,
adapted,
I
right?
can imagine, because it makes all the paper money people had been saving completely worthless. So that's happened.
They had like a swap line for it. It wasn't like, oh, bam, your cologne's worthless. Like, you have these redemption periods, right? But yeah, you better switch it over pretty quick, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty stressful when that happens, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
At least with the Bitcoin thing, they didn't have to lose what they already had, and in fact, they got $30 extra.
So what is Armenia on? Are they in the Eurozone technically, or no?
They're right in between where, like, Asia and Europe meet, and
Okay.
Armenia has their own currency called the dram, but it's like, I think it exchanges like 500 to one for a US dollar, so it's pretty worthless. And I think, um, like, they have their own central bank. I don't know this too well, but I think they have their own central bank, and they don't really have a lot of power. They rely a lot on the Russian central bank, I think. So
Oh, okay. So they're a lot more tied to the Russian banking system than the European or American
yeah,
one, right?
they're definitely not tied to the European. They're like an old Soviet republic that, they're a small country with difficulties with their bordering neighbors, and they have a hard time even defending their borders without the help of Russian military. So
Jeez.
yeah.
Yeah, this world is such a big place, man. Like, I'm getting deeper into like geography, and like I'm trying to learn a lot about Africa recently, because I think that's like second to South America, or maybe
Hmm.
first. That's where like the Bitcoin revolution is really going to take hold.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but
Central African
yeah,
Republic is the second place to deem it legal tender. And I don't
yeah.
know too much about it, except for, from, I think I listened to one podcast where somebody said that, similar to El Salvador, this comes from like a leader kind of seeing, understanding it, and wanting to kind of, help his country, help his nation, help his people by adopting it for his country, having that vision. So that's interesting. That seems to be a commonality between the two countries. Maybe that's the path forward for a lot of places.
I think it's you're gonna see that like the countries in the respective continents that first adopt it are gonna reap the benefit of like all that external investment, because eventually, if like dozens of countries accept Bitcoin, like, you're not special for accepting Bitcoin, right?
Hmm.
El Salvador has seen such an inflow of capital since it's begun. Like, their tourism numbers are like sky high.
Hmm.
It's just like tourism is this contagious thing, right? And
Hmm.
first you legalize Bitcoin, and then you get a bunch of Bitcoiners coming to the country, and then they're sharing photos of what that country looks like, and you're getting more and more tourists. You get more people who get jobs in tourism there. And it's these like really, really fast building knock-on effects. And I don't think people are going to be going to Central African Republic to, go on vacation anytime soon,
Mm-hmm.
but they're going to be seeing a lot of external investment, I think, because from what I understood from a video clip I watched, a big imperative for them to adopt Bitcoin was they want to finally start drilling for their own oil there. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason they weren't before is because with the CFA franc system, when they exported oil, they would lose something like 30% of the value. But if they made Bitcoin a legal tender, if they could find another nation to buy the oil in Bitcoin, then they could actually profit off of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
This
that's
is an
interesting.
amazing
That's gonna
fact,
ruffle
man.
feathers. That's gonna ruffle feathers, but
Yeah, it better ruffle some feathers. Like, I hate to say this, but fuck France. Like, I don't
yeah,
like swearing too much on the podcast, but like when I found out about this, like this is a thing that people don't know about. That France controls, was it 14 or 16 African nations and
yeah.
just cuts them at the knees every single day by making them not be able to have their own currency that can like have any value whatsoever. Anything you do in those countries, whatever value you accumulate, you have to like get some money for it, right? And you can't get any money except for these whatever, I don't even know what it's called, but
If you want to import anything, it has to go through
mm-hmm,
France's treasury. I don't know about their central bank, but their treasury. Well, that's the thing
mm-hmm,
that's interesting about this is it's not even France's central bank that's handling. I don't think they have a central bank because they're using the euro. But anyways, their treasury is handling all of these transactions to the euro or the US dollar or whatever, and they take commission fees. Like this is like MoneyGram, but for like a country or for like 16 countries, right? Like France
mm-hmm,
is like the
mm-hmm.
MoneyGram for 16 African nations, and it's disgusting.
It's
Like they're
deplorable.
really, yeah, it cripples these countries and their ability to grow and whatnot. And the trouble with a lot of these countries too is like they have to import stuff. They cannot produce enough energy. They cannot produce adequate food
Mm-hmm,
supply in those countries as well.
mm-hmm,
And so every time they want to import stuff, if they're not just getting IMF loans and then the loans are in US dollars, so they don't have to worry
mm-hmm,
about that. If they want to import stuff that they've made with their own economic fruits, France gets a cut of that. And like, I mean, it's crazy. Like we're acting all woke and shit. Like we care about like all people's lives and stuff. And
mm-hmm,
in Europe, like they love doing that stuff too. But like you're it's like indentured servitude when you do this
mm-hmm,
to countries. And I'm glad that it's like it's cool that Central African Republic is like right smack in the center.
mm-hmm.
And it's similar to how El Salvador is like right smack in the center of like that part of
Yes.
the hemisphere as well, right? These little fires that spark, and God knows where it's going to be in a couple of years, but I think it's really going to start spreading for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like now that, like, if from what I understand, you're right. The Central African Republic has a lot of natural resources, and if they can actually tap into those resources and get value, true value for them, and be able to accumulate that, then that could potentially like turn the country upside down.
It's a lot harder of a place to find information on, but I mean, I think the statistic that goes around is like only 10% of the country has access to internet. So
Mm-hmm.
I would hope that just by adopting Bitcoin and trying to get some more entrepreneurs in there to build out their wallet system and all that, that will come as a side benefit as well. It's like, okay, if we're gonna get everyone Bitcoin wallets, we might as well set up some cell towers here, get everyone, some mobile phones and stuff to start being able to use this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Inter- Very interesting. Uh, there was one last subject I wanted to talk about that's skipping me at the moment, but that's fine. We can just finish off maybe talking about like so in El Salvador, they is it only Lightning Network? How does it work with regards to on chain? Is that ever an option?
Yeah, it is an option. Doesn't really work for commerce at all, unless
Hmm.
you're okay with not having confirmations, but I don't think anybody really is.
Yeah, yeah, you'd have
So
to
we
as
we
the.
did find like a couple stores like they couldn't get the Lightning working, but here's the thing: is like we were there within the first 3 months of them implementing Lightning into Chivo Wallet. I think the first implementation didn't even have functional Lightning. My
It got really white all of a sudden.
Yeah, the sun's coming through my room. That's why.
Ah, shit.
Um, The first implementation of Chivo had really shoddy Lightning capabilities, and we actually got transactions that got lost because of it as well. And I assume it's not the Lightning Network's fault; it's more Chivo. So a couple places were like, no, we only do on chain. And then you'd have to wait there for like 10 minutes for the block to confirm. And then like you just cross your fingers that you're in the next block. Otherwise, you're there for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. But
Bump that
yeah,
fee.
basically commerce everywhere is Lightning. Now, here's one of the fun facts that like I don't know how they do this, but it's amazing. So they have these Chivo ATMs all around the country, and you can go and take like a $20 bill, put it in, and then you hold up your phone, and it'll just send Bitcoin to the QR code.
Yeah.
And then in reverse, you can also just send the ATM Bitcoin, and then it can give you it back. And you can do this on it's a two-way ATM, and you can do this with zero fees. So you can buy Bitcoin and then sell it the next minute on the same ATM and get almost the exact same amount of money back. And that is really cool. And I think part of
Hmm.
that is they bought some Bitcoin for the reserve or something, or they figured out this exchange system. But
Very
um,
cool.
basically, like I don't know, they might have some private Bitcoin ATMs in El Salvador, but you can use all of these Chivo ATMs without having to give them any sort of ID. I think all they want is your cell phone number to send you like a secure code, but they don't ask for you to have the Chivo app or anything, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And
There's one
yeah,
thing, sorry to cut you off, but I remember watching your video and there was like you're talking about all the innovation that's happening in El Salvador, and there's one guy who had like this machine where you're just putting in coins and then you just scan a
oh,
QR
Edgar,
code
yeah, that was
and
really cool.
mm-hmm. Can you talk
Yeah,
about that?
so that's like stacking sats to the next level, right? Because for most of their economy, it's not digital. Like they don't have not everyone just has like, tap to pay. And then a lot of the street merchants definitely are not going to take debit or credit, right? Because you're going to have these like 25 cent per transaction charges. And so people are carrying change around all the time. And one of the entrepreneurs that we met down there was making a machine where you could basically just okay, I'm gonna fucking explode here. It's because you know what? My window has the sun coming right at it. I don't know why
Yeah,
people
yeah.
just.
It's not
Um.
bothering me. Don't worry about it.
Anyways, what I was gonna say is, Edgar has this machine where you can just put in coins. It tallies it up, and then it just sends you that Bitcoin via Lightning to any Lightning-enabled wallet. And I thought like that is so cool because
Yeah.
you can look at it for like what it is on the surface, and then you can look at it for like the economic value of it, which is like you're turning physical into digital, um at like with like a machine, like a box that turns physical. It's I guess you can say it's like a Bitcoin ATM, but uh, because it just takes coins, right? It's like this tiny box. You just like you put it in like you're putting quarters into like a gumball machine, and then it just sends you lightning payment, and it's like instant too. I think I showed the whole thing in the video, but it was like
Yeah, yeah. It was like right away. You had it
and
on a Moon Vault wallet.
any increment because of lightning, like you can set a fee and all that if you want
Mm-hmm.
to,
Mm-hmm.
but because of lightning, like you load it up with Bitcoin, and then you can just get it on your phone like 10 cents or 20 cents worth, and that's awesome. And a lot of people don't really understand this, but like all the debit and credit systems that we have right now for like paying for, let's just say, a coffee or whatever, there's like 25 cents minimum to do these things. And I know that like Jack Mallers is really changing this up with Lightning, but
Mm-hmm.
this is a big deal in third world countries because they don't have, even if these debit machines came to El Salvador, it's not like the average person is going to carry around like
Mm-hmm.
a debit machine at your local like fruit market, right? But everyone's going to have their phone.
Yeah.
And so the ability to just like beam over money digitally and not have to carry around change is awesome, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
again, bank in the palm of your hand, like we just will never understand it here because we take it all for granted because we've had this system
Mm-hmm.
forever. But you go to other countries, you see how it works. If
Mm-hmm.
you're a traveler, you really understand this concept too because you're constantly changing currencies and working within
Mm-hmm.
other systems. And some countries you can just tap to pay, and other countries you always got to have a lot of cash on you, and that makes you
Mm-hmm.
nervous. Like
Mm-hmm.
being able to have a bank anywhere across any country around the world is going to change the way that people travel, and it's going to change the way that these economies are able to actually have savings too. And it's
Mm-hmm.
inspiring, man. The good stuff is just it's not happening here in the US and Canada.
Yeah.
I want to educate people
Mm-hmm.
on this, but it's really hard to just drill it into people's heads that
Hmm.
Uh,
It
Nowhere else
takes
has it
time.
as good as we do in terms of like monetary privilege. So
Yeah, absolutely. We need to have that pain, right? To have the need to learn and understand these things. And
yeah, like
maybe let's finish
this.
off with the last question of why did you, what was it that made it primed you to be able to understand Bitcoin and see its value? Like it's curiosity or pain or a combination of both. Can you uh,
Hmm.
give that story a little bit, maybe from incorporating your orange peel story? I think you said to me in our first conversation that your girlfriend was the first person who introduced you.
No, she wasn't the first person who introduced me. I introduced her to it, but
Oh, okay.
she
My
she went
apologies.
into
I mixed up the
or maybe
story.
that's someone else. Okay, huh? Gotta give me a second on this. So the question is like, what is kind of my imperative to care about Bitcoin, or
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Because some people you talk to them about it, and it doesn't seem to click with them because they don't see the need for it. They even if you explain to them like what you just said, you can beam money digitally instantaneously to somebody across borders. They're like that. I can't use that.
yeah.
So why is it your Peruvian background?
I don't have like I'm just actually getting in touch with my Peruvian roots, but I'm not like I
Hmm.
wasn't born there or anything.
Hmm.
Um, I think the reason that I have gravitated towards this whole time is that like I come from a background of filmmaking, and I used to be so into writing my own stories. Like I really liked fiction, and I would love science fiction, and I would love fantasy and stuff. And I used to be, when I was like really little, like 6 years old, I'd play with Lego, and I'd make up all these interesting stories. And I
Hmm.
used to look down on documentaries because I was like, well, they can't be like that interesting, right? Like, I mean, I can come up with like all these things, Star Wars and all that, and then as you mature, you start reading more, right? And you read biographies and you
Hmm.
watch documentaries, and you realize that like truth is always stranger and more amazing than fiction. And then you start
Hmm.
getting into history, and that gets really interesting to see the
Hmm.
rise of, when you're in history class in high school, you learn about Hitler and World
Hmm.
War II, and then the Cuban Missile Crisis, and all these things, and you're just like, man, I can't believe that like we've made it out alive in all these situations. Like we've had so much
Hmm.
bad stuff happen to humanity, but we always seem to push through.
Hmm.
And all of the things that kind of backstop these real stories are usually uh, technology in some way, right? Like the way that we are able to progress in humanity is through
Hmm.
technology. And
Hmm.
I guess that brings us to Bitcoin, because I never used to think of money as a technology.
Hmm.
I used to, well, most people only know it as like fiat, right? Like they didn't.
Medium of
You
exchange.
ask most people, and they don't know that we used to ever have money tied to gold. Like you'd be surprised. Like most people don't know that. All they know is that the government creates money, and they've thought that it's always been that way throughout history forever.
Hmm. Yeah.
They won't even know the glass beads thing or anything like that, right? They've
I
always just
think
thought
I
government just
think
makes paper.
if you
Yeah.
press them, I think they'll realize that they actually know it, but they don't remember it. Like everyone knows,
Yeah.
like pirates with gold, like they had gold in
Mhm.
chests and stuff like that. Like
But we don't ask why. It's just
yeah,
like it just
exactly.
it works, so we don't ask why, right?
Hmm.
The countries that don't have it working, they ask why all the time, right? And they ask why so hard that they change their whole life over it. They leave at any expense. And like
Hmm.
I'm getting into, there's a shout out to I'm gonna botch her name, Island Osario, on Twitter. She's a Vancouverite, and she writes these amazing blog posts and Medium articles on immigrant stories from Syria, from Venezuela,
Hmm.
and how money plays a part in people's decisions to leave places. And so,
Hmm.
like growing up in Canada, I've never experienced that. Like I've had friends who have immigrated here, but it's never been tied to monetary systems. And you just like, as you become an adult, you dig deeper into all of these things if you're really curious about things.
Hmm.
And I just realized like how the form of money plays such an important role in so many people's lives, yet we never question it. It affects
Yeah.
and it touches every single one of us. It's a story onto itself,
Hmm.
that builds over long periods of time. But we don't look at it like that. We just look at it like a tool to, buy whatever, and we only care about money in so much that it gets us the things that we want. But it
Mm-hmm.
is one of the most interesting stories ever, the evolution of money and just seeing all
Mm-hmm.
this stuff. And so my imperative with Bitcoin is, at first I looked at it like this speculative asset, but when I really started to think about it in terms of money, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously the Bitcoin standard is like the ultimate book to really go back and compare different types of money and how we got here. Bitcoin
Great.
has such a fascinating story. And I can't help but think, in the grand scheme of things, like it becomes the winner just because it comes from this like pure mathematical place that we've just never
Mm-hmm.
had money from
Mm-hmm.
before. Money
Mm-hmm.
used to be a geological and like scientific based thing. When we had it based out of gold, we knew the scarcity of gold. We knew it as an
Mm-hmm.
element on a periodic table.
Mm-hmm.
Now money is like a fictional thing. It's a fictional thing that people write, and they
Mm-hmm.
mess around with their ledgers. And
Mm-hmm.
we went from a hard physical reality to a paper fictional reality, which is fiat. And I think we're
Mm-hmm.
going back to a hard digital reality, and that's Bitcoin. And so that story, it's got to be the best one to tell out of all of them. And that's
Yeah.
why that's why I love it. Like, it's so interesting to be a part of this space, like every single day,
Mm-hmm.
seeing the collapses, seeing the successes. It's just, you couldn't. I think eventually one person will make a really great mini series on the evolution of Bitcoin. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if there's a market demand on it. There's so many different players involved, but that is going to make an amazing show one day. How humanity evolved into Bitcoin. Maybe we'll do it once it becomes like hyper Bitcoinization, but like that is going to be the coolest mini series to see the start of like Satoshi,
Yeah.
Gavin Andreessen, all these like old guys uh, talking
Hal.
about it, Adam back, and then
Hal.
going through each one of the successive waves and making that like an episode. Like, there's so much there for a story, and like that's the shit that I just revel in. So rant over.
Yeah, yeah. It would be like cool if you could somehow dramatize like all the like the forum conversations that that are saved when like Satoshi's first introducing the white paper and all that and all that. It wouldn't be
Well,
too
I think that's, yeah.
yeah.
Like, I think that's part of the reason that a show probably hasn't been made about it, is because how do you adapt that into a visual medium?
Yeah.
Like, there's not much
Yeah.
physicality going on,
Yeah,
right?
just
Like,
typing on a
people
computer.
typing and texting, and it's just like you kind of have to have it because the documentary people explain it. But yeah, like showing people out in the real world using it and all that. But like,
Mhm,
there's so many interesting examples. Like, I know like
mhm.
The Good Wife, or was it The Good Wife? There was like some TV show in like 2012 where they had like a bit about like some kid buying Bitcoin at like $3, and it was like a popular show, right? And like you watch
Ah.
that in a TV show, and you're just like, oh, like whatever. But then you go back in history, you realize like, oh my god, like writers in a writing room were writing like scripts about the price of Bitcoin, and they probably didn't buy it when they were writing the script, and that sucks for them. But now it's a part of history, right?
That's funny. Yeah, very
Yeah,
cool. Man, well, I love your answer about the story of Bitcoin. Yeah, it is a mind blowing story, and like you said, a lot of
it
times
is.
truth is stranger than fiction. And maybe one day I'll have to do like a real deep dive into it for myself and kind of see if, like what I can pull out to try to share on the podcast, like some of the most interesting bits. Like I know like some of the more general stuff, but I have read the white paper, but I've never actually gone through and like you know actually read what Satoshi himself has said in the forums besides the white paper. So that would
Yeah,
be an interesting
yeah.
project to go back to.
Man, I saw this page like a couple of years ago, and I was trying to find it, but somebody was doing like linguistic analysis on every single one of Satoshi's posts and trying to tie it to, I think it was either Gavin Andreessen, Nick Szabo, Hal
Hal
Finney,
Finney.
and a couple others. But like, it was a really interesting post analyzing the way that the English was being used, and like what tenses and writing style it was. And they were looking at like the times that it was being posted. And I think the consensus was that like the person was likely posting from California, but through linguistic analysis, they were like kind of finding that the person might have been British.
Oh,
And then
interesting.
everyone was like, oh, it's got to be Craig Wright then, right? Um,
Get out of
But
here.
yeah, and then some people were saying like, well, wait a second, like no, there's actually like there's a surprising lack of cohesion in the way that this person was typing. Like this, it seemed like it was multiple people that would just take over this account at different times. And man, I gotta find that thread. It was like it was years ago, but some group of people did this like big analysis to try and really figure it out, just based on every single one of his posts on Bitcoin Talk. And
It's got to be
it's all
multiple
speculation,
people.
but it's interesting stuff because like nobody
Hmm.
cares anymore. But like back
Hmm.
in the day, that was like all the rage was like trying to figure out who Satoshi was and all these imposters who pretended that they were him. So
Hmm.
or her.
Yeah. It's got, yeah. I mean, whatever. We don't have to speculate, but it's got to be multiple people. Who the hell is smart enough by themselves to come up with Bitcoin?
The thing that I always think about this when people say multiple people is when you have a group like this, it seems impossible that someone wouldn't like spill the beans on it. And then the other thing too is like if you had all that Bitcoin, like you just left it in those wallets forever, like would Satoshi forget his own keys? Like there's all these things that don't make sense for like a human to do, which is like
Yeah.
not eventually be tempted by all that economic value to do anything with it,
Yeah.
right? They obviously knew that like if Satoshi's wallet starts spending, then everyone's like, oh shit, he's alive, the project's compromised or whatever as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, there's so many questions about, I guess, the actions of those first couple wallets that are like, was this a god? Like, was this somebody who was like not like tempted by anything a normal human would? Um, but yeah,
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of Bitcoiners will say that.
Max Kaiser had some interesting. He was like, oh, I think Bitcoin's turning cent. He had this little blurb he gave me. I met him at Bitcoin Miami. He was saying like at a certain block, Bitcoin became like sentient.
Hmm.
It had its own like AI
It's
in there.
alive. It's
I couldn't I
alive.
couldn't I couldn't understand like what that actually meant, but I was like, yeah, there is some conscious there's a conscious being that has created Bitcoin that does not function like a normal human would. That's all I could say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I would be tempted if I was Satoshi and I knew the private keys to the wallets that contain like what is it, a million coin?
yeah, it's over a bunch, but I'm like, and I was thinking like, what if he just lost it all in Mount Gox? What if he was like, man, you know what? Like, I'm gonna mess around. I'm gonna try and give Bitcoin some liquidity. So I'll trade against myself in Mount Gox, and then just like one day he just lost it all, and then he's like, fuck, I'm out of here. Because I think Mount Gox was around in 2011. No. Oh
Yeah,
wait, no,
yeah.
it went down in 2014 though. I don't know. Possible.
That would be like the comedy, like the Seth Rogen version of like the Bitcoin story.
Yeah.
All right, man. We've been going for over an hour. I really
It's a
enjoyed
good
the
chat, dude.
conversation.
I always
Yeah.
I always love rambling about Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's like we
Appreciate
could
your
keep
your
going. We
your
could
good
just keep
questions too, man.
bantering. Yeah, I really want to know what is it that makes people tick about it, because I feel like some of my friends are very cool with me trying to explain it to them, and they keep hearing it out, which is very nice of them. But for some reason, it's still not. It doesn't make sense to them, and it's because they just don't have the imperative. There's not that pain. They haven't experienced the thing that makes people driven to Bitcoin, and so I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what it was for you.
It's always, I mean, I have the same thing. Like every single one of my friends hears me ramble about it. I've lost friends over it actually because I think like,
Hmm.
sometimes when you enter like a different, I guess, like wealth class, like it becomes
Hmm.
weird with certain friends. Like
Mm.
you end up just buying everything, like dinners and stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, like it's interesting though. And then like you have people who kind of like resent you for like not telling them about it earlier. Um, right. So
The "we are still
yeah,
early" line doesn't work with them, eh?
no, no. But you know what? Like I think at the end, everyone has to approach it differently. Like I would say there wasn't like one thing that got me into it. When I first got into it, it was to buy shit on the internet that I wasn't supposed to buy. And then I got into it as like, ooh, I can trade this. And then I got into it as like, oh, what is money? And
Hmm.
yeah, it's just like I think that's when people really start to get into it, is when
That's
they
the
start
best
asking
question.
about what is money. It is the best question, because when you start asking that, then you start really learning the purpose of it and then understanding why it's going to be here forever.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a really hard path to go down for a lot of people. And like my job is like, look, my one plug for myself is this, is we have so many great podcasts and great books and great long form material on Bitcoin. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem is these are not starting points for most people. Most people right now who need Bitcoin the most have so little free time to get into it that
Mm-hmm.
they need to get little snippets of information. You got, 9 to 5 moms with like 6 kids and like 2 jobs, and they need Bitcoin. They need a way to protect their savings, but they got a couple minutes a night and they don't want to start reading the Bitcoin Standard, while they got to put their kids to bed and stuff, right? They want to get the TikToks and the Snapchats and all these things. And then once it's piqued their interest enough there, then they'll commit the time to the big stuff. And so
Yeah.
all my only goal for the next like year or two is, I'm not the greatest. I'm not even close to being like a great mind on Bitcoin. There are so many others. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. The
Mm-hmm.
thing that nobody is doing is making really fun short content for people to
Mm-hmm.
rope them into this space.
Mm-hmm.
People are getting into this space because they hear about it as some like, great way to like make money. They're not
Mm-hmm.
learning about it in bite-sized chunks for what it is. They're just in it for the
Mm-hmm.
money. And if there's only one thing I can accomplish in my life, it's to get people in through like fun stories and interesting stories, and get them into Bitcoin, not because they want to make a ton of money, not because they want to sit down and spend
Mm-hmm.
10 hours going down a rabbit hole, but just
Mm-hmm.
because they enjoy the story of Bitcoin and every little piece that it starts out with, right? So
Yeah, little
yeah.
bite-sized content to get your kind of mouth wet, I guess. I don't know, get you
Right. I
salivating
mean,
for
if you're gonna
something
if you're gonna
more.
go down the rabbit hole, you gotta start with like a carrot on a string, and that's
Yeah,
me.
that's a good way to put it. Well, then
Yeah.
just give everyone like a way to find your content.
Yeah, so I have my YouTube channel. It's you can just look it up on YouTube, Kinetic Finance. It's a mix of TikToks, live streams, and whatever other videos I make. And then it's the same on TikTok, Instagram. Just look up Kinetic Finance and you'll find me. And then Twitter as well, if you want to see me get into arguments with other people on the internet. Sometimes that's fun.
So what else do you do on Twitter, right?
Just shit posting all day long.
Excellent. Thank you so much for listening to the end. If you want to reach out and talk some more about Bitcoin, you can always tweet at me at jmartfit or message me on Instagram, same thing at jmartfit. There's also the email option. Send an email to newsletter@jmartfit.com. Otherwise, till next week, stay active, be grateful, J-Mart out.